Hello everyone, welcome to Zarif Game New. In this video, I am going to create the BeakyBird game in Unity. So it's just a simple obstacle avoiding or point collecting type game. And if you have watched my videos till now, you should be able to create this game in an hour. And if you have really watched my videos for like a couple of long times. So it's a beginner mobile game. So you should be able to create it yourself. And the game concept is the birds, which are of different types. It falls from the top, and we have to collect the yellow birds and avoid the black birds. And the red birds are which are like boost, which gives extra 10 points. And it's pretty much it. So we are just going to use a couple of simple scripts, and that's going to be one enemy or obstacle, whatever you like to call it. So let's create. Oh, I already created the script. So this is a new Unity project opened up. I'm using the latest build, stable build, which is the 2021-30F1. If you are using any of the previous builds, it may cause error. So the files will be in the GitHub link down below. And let's start creating our UI first. So for now, it's look pretty much empty. So let's add an UI, and we need to import the Text Mesh Pro. So it's going to import Text Mesh Pro, and let's delete this text. And let's set up our canvas first, or maybe let's set up our main camera first. So our main camera, it's going to have somewhat like the bluish color. So it's 179 and 50, and we are going to have its size to 10.8. So it's 1080 by 1920. The size is like half of it. And let's set up our canvas. So instead of screen space overlay, we'll set up the main camera. And let's set it to 10, order in layers, scale with screen size 1920 by 1080, and match width and height to 0.5. And let's start creating our UI. So first thing we are going to need is our game manager. And we'll attach the game manager script to it. And let's set up our UI. And in our UI, the first let's add the start screen. So we'll create empty, and we'll call it start panel, and it's going to stretch for the whole screen. And let's view it up, and we'll add a button component to it, so we can click on it, and it should be fine. Now inside our start panel, we are going to have start text. So let's create a UI, and let's Xmash Pro, let's have it board size to be 128, width to be 1500 by 128, and we are going to position it towards the center. 750, and we'll call it slide net to play. Let's have it 750 slide net to play. And if we increase the size, maybe it should be fine. And we'll need an outline to it. So instead of having the outline, we'll just use the drop shadow, or maybe outline. Yep, outline. So that's how it's looking right now. And let's increase our outline thickness to a little bit higher so we are able to see it. And it does not get too much, so let's have it to 0.15. So that's how it's looking right now. Let's create a UI image, and these are going to be the three images. So the first one is the Beaky or Becky. Let's have it for the Becky. And for the image, we are going to use the yellow, and its size is going to be 160 by 160. And we'll position with respect to the center negative 512, negative 256. And it's going to have a text. What text do we need? Hmm. One text going to be here, one is going to be here. So let's create a UI text mesh pro, and we are just going to call it text. Anchor is going to be from the center negative 160, similar 128, and this one is beaky. Okay, so this guy is a beaky one, and we'll need to increase the size to 1000 or it won't fit, or maybe around 700 will also be fine. And for the material, we are going to use our default material, maybe outline material, so both should be more than similar. And there's a beaky. We'll rename it to beaky, and there's going to be two more, and we'll duplicate the beaky, and the second one, this one's going to be becky. So if you want to follow along with the UI, you can follow along, or you can just skip it. And it's at positive 512, and similarly instead of beaky it's going to call becky. After having becky, we have the last one, which is called freaky. Uh, 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 and freaky is going to be positioned. Where do we need to position it? This one's the red one. Negative 384. So negative 512, positive 512. There's a problem with its position. I don't know, where did I push it? So let me see, where did I push it? Sometime it happens. So we have our beaky here, our becky in towards the right, and our freaky is going towards the top. So the X position is going to be okay. So this one is the X position, negative 384, 512, 512, and the text is going to be towards the right. And let's have position X 350, position Y 0, and this one is going to be called freaky because it freaks out, and both of the texts are not bold enough, so it's looking a little bit bad. So this is the start screen. Now we are going to create the next panel, which is the help screen. So let's create an empty, and we'll call it help panel. Similarly, it's going to stretch the whole screen. Let's hide our start panel, and similarly it's going to have a button component with none. And inside our help panel, let's first add the help text, and after we'll add the three buttons. So for the help text, it's going to be at around 0448 700 by, what's the size, 750 by 128. And let's make it bold. Let's have it 128, and the material we are going to use our outline material so it looks similar. And for the text we are just going to call it rules. Position it towards the center, and we have our first text. Now afterwards, similarly, we are going to add an image, and this image will first one is miss, so it does not needs to miss, and its size is going to be 160 by 160. For the position X, we are going to use -640, and for the position Y, let's use 100 and 256. And for the image, which is the yellow one, because we never needed to miss, let's create a text and we'll just call it text. And it's going to be positioned from the right. And let's set up its size to 1000 by 50. It does not matter, whatever it 128 material outline. Font is going to be similar, 500, position towards the center, and yeah, alignment, let's have it at the center. And the first one is going to be never miss, and we need to align it towards the left, and its position is going to be, where should we position it? 564. -160. Why did it start at -160? Let's make it bold. So the first one is hmm, so first one is the never miss rules. Let's duplicate it twice, and this is going to be catch. The sprite we are going to use the black one, and the text we are going to call it never catch. And for the position we are going to set it up at to 0. This one we are going to set it up -256. Instead of miss, we'll call it points. And the sprite we are going to use the red one, and for the text we'll call +10 points. So these are the rules, and this panel is always going to show up. And after having our help panel UI, let's add our game panel UI. So let's create an empty and we'll call it game panel. It's going to stretch the whole screen, nothing else is going to be needed. Let's add a UI, and we are going to add, where did the text mesh pro go? Text mesh pro, we'll just call it score, and let's hide the help panel. It's going to be position -80, 500 from the top, -80. Height is going to be 160. 1000 by 50, and let's make it bold, 128. Outline, forgot 10, position it towards the center, and the text we are going to use is 0, and having as many zeros as we can. And let's set up our last panel, which is the mm, game over panel or end game panel, whatever I want to call. So in our game over panel, similarly, we are going to have two images. So let's create an UI image, and we'll call it image under /1. For the size, we are going to use 160 by 160, and for the position, it's going to be -768. For the sprite, let's use the yellow one. We'll duplicate the image one, rename it to image2, set up the position to +768. It's all the basic UI stuff, so we'll always need to do it manually. And I would not shorten the video because if we don't do it, then there will be complaints. Not complaints, you guys are good, but you won't be able to like set up the so maybe you guys would be able to, but it won't look like mine. And whatever it may be, I'm just going to create the UI here only. So let's add our texts. So the first text is going to be end score text, or maybe just end. And this end is going to be 384. Let's make it bold, 128. And let's use the material of the outline and width. It's going to be similar to 1000 by 50. Let's make it 1500 by 50. Position everything towards the center, and it's going to call game over. And maybe we did a little bit higher. Now 128 was fine. So after having our end, we are going to have our end score. So inside our end score, we are going to position at 192, and let's have it call a score of some random number. Afterwards, we are going to have high score, and similarly, instead of score, it's just going to call the high score. Position is going to be 0, and finally, we'll have the two buttons, which is the first one is the restart button. And after having a restart button, mm, 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 the text is going to be tap to play, and everything's fine. Position towards the center. We'll need to add a button component, so let's add a button, none, and we'll have the button do its thing afterwards. So after we have the restart, the last one is going to be the quit, and this both are the functionalities we'll create first. So instead of tap to play, we'll press quit, and instead of negative 192, we'll use negative 384. And let's check our game how it looks. 16:9, 16:10, WXGA 4K. So our game's looking pretty much fine. Now, after having our basic UI setup, let's create our game objects which we are going to need. So the game objects are also pretty simple. So the first thing we are going to need is a background. We'll position it towards 000, and for this background, let's have it attach a 2D circle first. Let's just call it BG circle, and we won't know where it is. Let's resize it to 5 cross 5, and we'll add one more circle. And now let's position it around here and rescale it in the both of the axes. Duplicate the circle, position it towards the left. So that's how our basic cloud is going to look, and we are just going to use rescale and rescale. Okay, that was the canvas. We need the circle. So our basic cloud's looking fine. Let's position it somewhere around at the top. We'll also need to rotate it a little bit. So let's rotate it, and afterwards we are going to duplicate it, position it around here, rotate it a little bit, and we'll increase its Z scale, Y scale again, and this is just the basic setup for our UI. Let's rotate it. So it's going to have it towards the center. Let's move it a little bit down. And similarly for this three, it should look good enough. So this is our background. We are not going to add anything else to it. Z index we need to set to 0. Whose Z index changed? Hmm, our BG circle. Okay, that's the rotation. The index doesn't matter. So this is our background, and we'll position the background a little bit farther. So let's position it at -5. And after having our background setup, we'll need to have our player. So our player is going to be this. Mm, mm, mm. And we'll need to change its pixels per unit to 128, and maybe we'll need more, 64. So it's looking good enough, and we'll call it player. It's going to have a tag of player, and let's attach its components first. So it's going to have a circle collider. Let's decrease its radius, position it where we want it to be. Rigid body 2D. Dynamic gravity scale to 0. It needs to be simulated because we are going to move it left and right. And finally, the player component. And after having our player, let's add our death screen. And we will call it finish, 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 finish. Reset, add a box collider 2D component. Let's set the size to 42 by 2, position to -12, and it should be fine. It needs to be set to trigger. Won't matter, maybe. Our obstacles are going to be set to trigger. Let's pull the game manager at the bottom. Now, let's also attach a rigid body 2D, and we'll make it simulated static. So our obstacle won't need to do anything. We'll do the scripting all together. And now let's create our obstacle prefab. So we are going to pull one of them to the screen. We'll call it obstacle. Let's attach a circle collider 2D, and we'll need to set its Y. Looks good enough. Let's also attach a rigid body 2D, gravity scale to 0, and we'll save it as prefab. Maybe we'll do it afterwards. So it also has an obstacle script attached to it, and it's not going to need any tags, but uh, it's going to be positioned in the downward direction, and afterwards we'll save it as a prefab, remove it from the scene. And these are all just the basic game objects, and our player needs to position towards -9. So we are almost created every game object we are going to need, and afterwards we'll start with the scripting process. So for the scripting, our player, let's start with the game start and the game quit function. So let's go inside Visual Studio, And inside Visual Studio, we have all three scripts opened up. So let's start with the game manager script, and we are going to have first public static game manager instance and an awake instance is equals to this, does not matter whatever it is. And afterwards we are going to need all the variables, so let's create a serialized field. So first let's add the start panel, then we have the help panel, game panel, game over panel, and player, and finally the obstacle prefab. And afterwards let's create a serialized field. We'll need to use using tm pro, and it's going to be tmp text, and the first one is going to be the score text, the last one is going to be the end score text, and next one is going to be the high score text. And let's create a private end score, private and high score. Maybe high score won't be needed, so private goal as game finished. And let's create the string for the high score, which is going to store as a player press. And uh, we have our awake, nothing else is needed. So instead of our awake, we are going to set the start panel to true. Let's copy, copy, copy. And start panel is going to set true, help panel is going to set to false, game panel is going to set to false, game over panel is going to set to false, and our player is also going to set to false. Score will be set to 0, and our has game finished will be set to false, and when the game finishes it's going to set to true. Now let's create our public functions first. So the first one is going to be public void start help. Whenever you create the start function and it's going towards the start panel dot set active to false, and help panel dot set active to true. So it's going to switch between panels. And let's create a public void. We are going to call it update score, and it's going to have an integer v, and we are going to increase the score count by v, and after increasing our score count we'll reset the text. And after having our update score, let's create the start game function, and inside our start game function we are going to start spawning our objects. So help panel dot set active to false, game panel dot set active to true, and we also need to have our player. So player dot set active to true, and afterwards we are going to call start coroutine. Let's call the spawner coroutine, and we'll need to create this coroutine. Maybe we should have our game restart. Public void game restart, and inside our restart we are just going to use unity engine dot scene management dot scene manager dot load scene, and we are going to load the 0th index scene, which is our current scene, and finally the game over with just use application dot quit and hashtag. If we are inside our unity editor, we are going to use unity editor dot editor application dot displaying the false, and we'll add this, and let's create an enumerator. I'm recording. Yep, I'm recording, and it's going to be called spawner. And while not has game finished, we are going to for yield return new, wait for seconds, and we are going to wait for 2 seconds, and we are going to instantiate obstacle prefab at 0, and obstacle prefab dot transform dot rotation. So it's going to spawn our objects. Now before that, we have public void game quit instead of game over. So let's add our game over function, and inside our game over function, the first thing we are going to see as game finished to true. After that, let's get the obstacles is going to be find objects of type obstacle. For each where item and obstacles, item dot game object dot set active to false. And let's get our high score first. High score is equals to player prefs dot has key high score. Then we are going to get the high score, get int, else we'll just set it to 0. And if score is greater than high score, then set the high score to be score, and player prefs dot set int high score to our high score. And afterwards we are going to set our high score text, and score text, no spaces are needed. And we'll show the game over panel, game over panel dot set active to true, and the game panel dot set active to false. So these are the only functions we are going to need. Now inside our player, Similarly, the player is not going to have much. We are just going to move left and right depending on the mouse position. Start's also not going to be needed. And inside our update, we'll first check if input dot get mouse button of 0. If we have the mouse button pressed, let's get our mouse position. V3 mouse post is equals to camera dot main dot screen to world point of input dot mouse position, and we are going to convert. Maybe it won't matter, and let's get the current position. Transform dot position dot y, or maybe position dot x is going to be mouse post dot x, and transform dot position is going to be position. So that was our player script. Similarly, we are going to edit our obstacle script. So obstacle script's going to have a couple of parameters, and I'm doing everything at one go. So maybe you won't be able to follow, but you can refer to the GitHub repository. And let's get our private float speed, and after we have pause y and pause x, and let's create a serialized field private sprite, and let's remove unnecessary. So using systems is unnecessary collections dot generic, and inside our player both collections are unnecessary. And let's go inside our obstacle. So private sprite, there are going to be three sprites. The first one is the yellow one, next we have the black, and finally we are going to have the red. And depending on the sprite, we are going to have the type and private int for the score. Now let's set everything up inside our start function. So the type is equals to random dot range, and we are going to go from 1 to 11. And let's see, type is less than 8, then 0. Else type is less than 10, then we are going to set the type to 1. Else finally we'll set the type to 2. And get component sprite renderer dot sprite is going to be type is equals to 0, then yellow. Else if type is equals to 1, which is our bomb, then we are going to use our black, and finally we are going to use our red. And after setting our type, similarly we'll add score. Type is equals to 0, then the score is 1. As type is equals to 1, then the score is going to be 0. As finally it's going to be 10. And let's set up v3 position is equals to transform dot position. Pose dot x is going to be random dot range from negative pos x to pos x. Pos dot y is going to be pos y, and transform dot position is going to be position. And afterwards inside our update function, we are just going to set transform dot position plus is equals to down multiply by time dot speed multiply by time dot delta. Hmm. And we need to set the on trigger enter 2D. And inside our on trigger enter 2D, the first thing we are going to check collision.compare tag. And the first tag we are going to compare is for our player. And then we'll just destroy. And if type is equals to 0, which is the yellow one, then we are going to update the score. Ah, hmm. If type is equals to 0 or 1, then we'll update the score. Else, we'll call the game over function 1, and the final one is 2. And finally, in our finish, so if collision dot compare tag finish, then we'll just destroy the game object. And if type is equals to 0, then similarly we are going to call the game over function, because we won't ever need to have that obstacle missed. And that's it for the scripting process. So it should be finished in and around an hour. Now let's add all our dependencies. So we have our mass. Speed is going to be 10. Position y is going to be 16. Position x is going to be maybe around 10. So let's add. Hmm. Hmm. Yep. 16. Okay, so it's 16 and position y is going to be 12, or we should have it rather at 12. For the yellow we are going to use the yellow sprite, black we are going to use the black sprite, red we are going to use the red sprite. The player does not need anything, but for our death it's the finish players as the player. And let's attach our functions. So everything should work except let's hit play. And the okay unassigned. We need to assign everything in our game manager. The first is the start, second is the help. Next we have the game panel. Next we'll need the game over panel. Next we'll need the player. We'll also need our obstacle prefab. And next are going to be the scores. So we have our end score text and our high score text. Now if we start the game, there should not be any problems. So let's hit play. And our bg is it should be positive 5. Okay, so after positioning it at 5, let's hit play. And we don't have functions attached to our start, so let's attach our game help start help function. The help panel is going to have the game start game function, and inside our game over panel the restart is going to have the game restart function. And the quit's going to have the game quit function. No, there should not be any problems. Maybe there'll be, but we'll fix it afterwards. So these are the rules. Never miss yellow, never catch the black one. Let's hit play. And we are able to move. So we didn't set it to be a trigger, and that's why there's problems happening. And both of them, no, only one of them needs to be trigger. So let's set the rigid body to trigger, and let's now hit play and slide net to play, catch. Our score is increasing, again it's increasing, and the game finishes. The high score is 20. I don't know when did I uh, quit. Quit is working. Let's hit play again, and the only thing that needs to be checked is our restart. Okay, so it has 10 points. That's why it was higher. And this is just a basic game setup. So it's a beginner level. And as you can see, the game's finished. And if you want to create something like that and have some cool looking visual graphics and sound, it's going to be similar. So that was it for this video. If you did like the video, do like, subscribe, and share to your fellow game developers, and also comment below what you want to have this video anything upgraded. And if there are enough members, I'm going to have a poll for selecting the next of the few games, because uh, as a game developer for a mobile, we need to learn so many things. And what else? Mm, do comment below if you do want the poll to be happened. So I'll create a poll, and we should be able to create some games. And if you have any suggestions of your own, I'll try to have that option in the poll too. So these are going to be somewhat like the mobile games complete. We may have different functionality, but not the multiplayer right now. After tackling some issues, so the skill needs to be good enough, because I've seen couple of game developers who like uh take so much time, like 6 months, 1 year, refining everything, and we'll just go by quantity, and afterwards we'll increase the quality. So that's was it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and see you guys in the next video. Hello. Okay, it's working.